The note came folded under a slice of pie I hadn't ordered. I'd been at the counter of the Blue Spruce Diner for 40 minutes, the only customer in a place that should have been closed 2 hours ago, when the waitress set down a plate of pecan pie I definitely had not asked for, and tucked beside it was a paper napkin folded into a tight little square with my name on the outside. Not sir, not on my name, which was strange, because I'd never told her my name. I'm Eli Marsh. I'm 33, and on Christmas Eve I was 400 miles from anything that resembled home, driving a refrigerated load of holiday hams from Denver to Kansas City, because the dispatch board on December 24th is a graveyard, and the only guys taking those runs are the ones with nowhere to be. I was one of those guys. I'd been one of those guys for 3 years. The snow had started around Lamont and gotten serious around Burlington, and by the time I rolled into this nothing town just over the Kansas line, the interstate signs were flashing closed. Chance squiled, "Do not travel," and I'd pulled off at the only exit with a light still on. The Blue Spruce, a squat brick diner with a plastic wreath on the door and a hand-lettered sign in the window that said open late on a night when nothing should have been open at all. I'd come in stamping snow off my boots, expecting a tired teenager counting minutes to close. Instead, there was her. She was maybe 30, dark hair pulled back and coming loose at the temples, the way hair does at the end of a double shift, an apron with a candy cane pin crooked on the strap, and she'd looked up when the bell over the door rang with an expression I couldn't read. Relief, maybe, or the opposite of relief, like I was both the thing she'd been waiting for and the thing she'd been dreading. "We're technically closed," she'd said. "The sign says open late. The sign lies. It's been lying since 1987. But she'd already reached for a menu. "Coffee? Please. And whatever's fast. I've got to sleep in the cab and get back on the road the second they reopen the interstate." They're not reopening the interstate. She'd poured the coffee without looking at the pot, the way you do when you've poured 10,000 cups in the same 6 feet of floor. "Not tonight. State Patrol called an hour ago. Everything's shut from here to Salina till morning. You're stuck, sugar." Sugar. That one I'd heard before. That one meant nothing. So I'd ordered a patty melt and resigned myself to a long cold night in the sleeper, and she disappeared into the kitchen, and I'd sat at the counter listening to a radio in the back play. "Have yourself a merry little Christmas" for the 4th time, and I'd done what I always did on Christmas Eve, which was nothing. Which was wait for it to be over. And then, 40 minutes later, the pie I didn't order, and the napkin folded into a square with my name I never gave her. I unfolded it. In careful blue pen it said, "Don't make me spend midnight alone. Joey." It's on the name tag. That's how I knew yours was on your jacket. Relax, I'm not a witch. I looked down at my jacket. There it was, stitched in red thread over the left chest, from a company 2 jobs ago that I'd never bothered to unpick. Marsh. I looked up. She was standing at the far end of the counter pretending to refill the salt shakers. Except the salt shakers were already full, and her ears had gone pink. It's not a she started. A line. The note says so. It's not a thing. She abandoned the salt entirely and crossed her arms. It's midnight in 11 minutes, and the owner went home, and the cook went home, and the last regular left at 9, and I'm the one who keeps the place open Christmas Eve every year, because somebody has to, and it's always me, and I've spent 4 of these now alone with the radio. And there is a human being sitting at my counter for the first time in 4 years. And I thought, she ran out of breath. I thought, maybe neither of us has to do the alone thing tonight. That's all. That's the whole proposal. You can throw the pie out if you want. It's good pie, though. I made it. I looked at the pie, then at the clock over the pie case, which said 11:51. "You made the pie," I said. "I make all the pie. The owner thinks he makes the pie. He has not made a pie since the Clinton administration." She was still bracing, still ready for me to be weird about it, and I understood that brace because I had one exactly like it. The one you wear when you've offered somebody a small true thing, and you're waiting to see if they'll be cruel about it. So I picked up the fork. "Sit down, Joey," I said. "It's almost midnight, and I'm not going to eat your pie alone while you fold napkins." Something in her face came loose. She came around the counter, and she sat down on the stool next to mine, not across, next to, and she pulled a second fork out of her apron pocket like she'd been planning this since Le Mans, and we split a slice of pecan pie at a diner counter while the radio played, and the snow sealed the whole world shut outside the window. The clock hit midnight while neither of us was looking. "Merry Christmas, Marsh," she said around a bite of pie. "Merry Christmas, Joey." And it was the first one in 3 years that didn't feel like a thing to survive. Here's the part where I'm supposed to tell you who I was before that counter, so you understand why a folded napkin nearly took me apart. 3 years earlier, I'd had the whole thing. A house outside Kansas City with a mortgage I was proud of. A wife named Dana who I'd been with since we were 22. We'd been trying for a kid, the kind of trying that takes over a marriage, doctors and calendars, and hope rationed out a month at a time. And then one October, on a run I didn't have to take but took anyway, because the money was good and I was always chasing the money, I got the call that there'd been a fire. Faulty wiring in a wall we'd been meaning to fix. Dana got out. The house didn't, and neither did the version of us that had lived in it. We didn't survive the after. That's the part nobody tells you. People think tragedy welds you together. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it just shows you that you'd been holding the marriage up from opposite ends, and once the thing in the middle is gone, there's nothing pulling you toward each other anymore. We divorced quiet and sad 18 months later. No villains. Just two people standing in the ash of realizing they'd been strangers who'd shared a mortgage. After that, I did the thing I knew how to do. I drove. I took every load, every holiday, every graveyard run on the board, because a truck cab is the one place in the world where being alone is the job and not a verdict. Nobody pities a trucker for being alone on Christmas Eve. It's just the route. I'd built a whole life out of routes that meant I never had to sit still long enough to feel how alone I actually was. A folded napkin doesn't fit in a life like that. A folded napkin is somebody asking you to sit still. "You went somewhere," Joey said. "I came back. Sorry. Long day. You've got a face that goes somewhere." She studied me over the pie. "I've been watching faces across this counter for 11 years. Yours is a leaver's face. You're already half back on the road in your head, even though the road's closed and you're not going anywhere till morning. That's a lot to get from a patty melt. It's a slow night. You're my whole research sample." She tilted her head. "Who'd you leave behind tonight? Or who left you?" It's one of the two with the Christmas Eve guys. It always is. I should have deflected. I was an expert at deflecting. Instead, maybe because it was midnight and the world was shut and a stranger had folded my name into a square, I told her the short version. The house. The fire. The marriage that didn't survive the after. Joey didn't do the thing people do. She didn't reach for my hand, didn't say I'm so sorry, didn't arrange her face into sympathy. She just nodded slowly, like I'd handed her a fact she'd add to her research sample. And then she said something that landed harder than any sympathy could have. "So you took the Christmas run on purpose?" "Yeah." "For 3 years?" "Yeah." "Because if you keep moving, nobody can see that you stopped having anywhere to go." She said it gently, but she said it and it went straight through the middle of me. "I know that one. Marsh. I'm not guessing. I keep this diner open on Christmas Eve for the exact same reason you keep driving on it. So I have a reason to be alone that isn't just being alone." I set the fork down. "What's your reason?" And that was when Joey stopped being the waitress with the pie and started being a person. She told me in pieces, the way you tell a stranger things you can't tell the people who know you. She'd grown up in this town. Real loud family, 5 kids, a mother who cooked for an army, and a father who ran a body shop and called everyone boss. Joey had been the one who stayed, not because she wanted to, because somebody had to look after Dad after the strokes. And the other 4 had careers in cities with skylines, and the math always came out the same. The one without the husband and the kids, and the big job is the one who stays. So she stayed. She ran the diner shifts. She took Dad to his appointments. She watched her siblings come home for the holidays with their loud, full lives, and then leave again. And every year the leaving got a little louder in the empty house after. Dad had passed in the spring, and now it was her first Christmas with nobody to look after at all, and she'd discovered the cruelest joke of caretaking. You spend years wishing for one quiet night to yourself, and then you get all of them, forever, and quiet turns out to be the worst thing there is. "Everybody thinks I'm fine," she said, turning her coffee mug in a slow circle on the counter, "because I'm competent. I run the place. I closed up after Dad. I sent the casseroles to the right addresses. People see competent and they think healed. They're not the same thing." She looked up. "You probably know that better than anybody. The leaver's face and the competent face are the same face. We both learned to look fine so nobody would ask. That's a lot to have in common with a woman who poisoned me with surprise pie. It's good pie. It's incredible pie. That's not the point. It's a little the point." But she was smiling now, the brace gone, and the radio rolled into something slow and old, And outside the snow kept coming down past the neon open sign. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't counting down to anything. I was just there on a stool next to a person at midnight. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "It's my counter." "But sure. Why me? You've had 11 years of guys at this counter. Why fold the napkin tonight?" Joey was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over, slow, giving me time to pull back, and turned my coffee mug a quarter turn, so the handle faced me, a tiny gesture. The kind of thing you do without thinking when you've decided somebody's staying a while. "Because you tipped before you ate," she said. "What?" "You put a 20 on the counter when I poured the coffee. Before the food came. Before you knew if it'd be any good." She shrugged, and her ears went pink again. "Guys who tip after are paying for service. Guys who tip before are saying, 'I see you. And I know you didn't have to be here either.' Nobody's done that in 11 years, Marsh. You did it without even knowing you did it." She picked her fork back up, so I folded the napkin. That's the whole science. I looked at her, at the candy cane pin gone crooked, at the hair coming loose, at the woman who'd kept a diner open every Christmas Eve so she'd have a reason for her own empty night, and who'd seen a 20 on a counter and read my entire life off it. And something I'd had bricked up for 3 years cracked clean open. "It's almost 1, I said, because I was a coward and that was easier than what I wanted to say. "It is." She didn't move. "They won't open the interstate till morning." "They won't. So I'm not going anywhere." Joey looked at me, and the brave version of her, the one who'd folded the napkin, came back into her eyes. "No," she said. "Tonight, neither of us is. We talked till 3 in the morning. Not about the heavy things. We'd gotten those out of the way, laid them on the counter between us like cards. And once they were down, we didn't have to keep picking them up. We talked about everything else. She told me the diner's history, every regular's order, the booth where a man had proposed in 1994, and the booth where a different man had been left at the altar's equivalent in 2009. I told her about the road, the good parts, the parts nobody asks about. The way the Rockies look at 5 a.m., with snow on them. The truck stop in Nebraska that serves the best green chile in the country out of a window the size of a mail slot. The strange floating peace of being the only vehicle on a closed highway, headlights swallowed by dark. "That sounds lonely," Joey said. "It is." I told myself it was peace for 3 years. I turned my coffee mug. "But it's just lonely with good scenery." She laughed at that, the real one, from the chest, loud enough to startle us both in the empty diner. And then she went quiet and she said, "Lonely with good scenery. That's it. That's this whole town for me." Around 2, she made a fresh pot and brought out a second pie, apple this time, because pecan is a starter pie and we've graduated. And we ate it straight from the tin with 2 forks. And at some point, her knee was resting against mine on the stools, and neither of us moved away. And the radio cycled back around to "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" for what had to be the 8th time. And this time it didn't feel like a personal attack. It felt like the right song. "Can I tell you something embarrassing?" she said. "You folded a napkin under surprise pie. We're past embarrassing. When the bell over the door rang tonight," she said, looking at the pie and not at me, "and you came in stamping snow off your boots, I had this flash. This stupid flash. I thought, oh, there he is." She shook her head, "Which makes no sense. I'd never seen you in my life. But that's the thought I had. There he is. Like I'd been keeping the place open for 11 years and 4 Christmas Eves alone, and the whole time I'd been waiting for the door to ring, and it to be you specifically." She laughed at herself, wet at the edges. "Anyway, that's why the napkin. I've never folded a napkin before in my life." I scared myself. My heart was doing something it hadn't done in 3 years. "Joey," I said. She finally looked up. "When the interstate opens," I said, "I have to take the load to Kansas City. I've got hams in the reefer and a delivery window and a job I can't blow off, even on Christmas." The light went out of her face a little. The brace started to come back. "Right. Of course. I wasn't asking you to, but Kansas City's a 6-hour round trip," I said. "And then I'm empty and headed back this way for my next pickup, which isn't till the 27th. I made myself hold her eyes. "Which means I could be back at this counter by tomorrow night. If there was a reason to come back." The brace dissolved. Something hopeful and terrified moved across her face. "There's pie," she said carefully. "I'm gonna need a better reason than pie, Joey. The pie's good, but it's 6 hours of driving good. Not, there's me," she said, fast, before she could stop herself, and then she pressed her lips together, like she wanted to grab the words back out of the air. I reached over and turned her coffee mug a quarter turn, the way she'd turned mine, handle facing her, The small, unthinking gesture of somebody who decided to stay a while. Yeah, I said, that's the reason. That's the only one I needed. I should tell you about the second night, because the first night was a fever and the second night was a choice, and those are different animals entirely. The first night, anybody can be brave. It's midnight, the world's shut. You're never going to see the person again. So you fold the napkin, you tell the stranger about the fire, you let your knee rest against theirs on a diner stool. The first night costs nothing, because the first night isn't real. It's a snow globe. You shake it and everything's beautiful, and then the snow settles and you go back to your life. The second night is when you find out if you meant it. I drove the 6 hours back from Kansas City on Christmas Day with my hands tight on the wheel the whole way, arguing with myself. The lever in me had 100 good reasons to just keep going. Head west, pick up the next load early. Let the diner be the beautiful thing that happened once. You don't even know her. It was a snowstorm and a sad song. You're projecting 3 years of loneliness onto a woman who was just being kind to a stranded trucker. The lever was very persuasive. The lever had kept me safe for 3 years. But I had the napkin on the dash. And every time the lever got loud, I looked at it. Don't make me spend midnight alone. And I thought about the brace in her shoulders when she'd handed it over, the way she'd been ready for me to be cruel about it. And I thought, somebody was brave first. The least you can do is be brave second. So I knocked on the side door. And when she opened it in sweatpants with flour on her cheek and said, "You came back," like she genuinely hadn't been sure I would, I understood that she'd spent the same 6 hours having the same argument from the other side. That she'd half expected the snow globe to settle and the trucker to be gone. That bravery for both of us wasn't the napkin. The napkin was easy. Bravery was the second night. Bravery was opening the door, not knowing if anyone would be on the other side of it. I almost didn't come, I admitted, standing in the snow. I almost didn't believe you would. She stepped back. Come in before you let the cold in. I've been baking since noon because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Her apartment was small and warm and entirely her. Too many cookbooks. A windowsill of struggling herbs she talked to. A calendar where every square was full of other people's appointments and almost none of her own. The tiny tree with its 4 ornaments. A wall of photos, most of them her father, a big laughing man in a body shop shirt. His arm around a younger Joey who hadn't yet learned the competent face. That's him, she said, catching me looking. That's Dad. Stan Kowalski, like the play, which he thought was the funniest thing in the world, and I had to hear about my entire life. She handed me a cookie shaped vaguely like a star. He'd have liked you. He liked anybody who tipped before the food came. Said it told you everything about a person. She froze, the cookie halfway to her own mouth. I never told you he said that, about the tipping. I made it sound like my own theory at the counter. It was his. It was his. She sat down at the tiny table. He used to say it about customers at the shop. Watch who pays before they see the bill, Joey. Those are your good ones. Her eyes went bright. I've been watching for the before people my whole life. Because my dad told me to, and then one walked in out of a blizzard on the first Christmas I didn't have him, and she stopped, pressed the heel of her hand to her eye. Sorry, I do this now. I didn't used to. Apparently grief waited until I had a witness. I didn't try to fix it. I'd learned that much from my own wreckage. You can't fix grief. You can only refuse to leave the room while somebody has it. So I reached across the tiny table and turned her coffee mug a quarter turn, handle toward her, the small, unthinking gesture, and I said, tell me about him. The whole thing. We've got all night and the road's closed. So she did. She told me about Stan Kowalski until 2 in the morning. The body shop, the strokes, the 11 years of appointments, the way he'd kept calling her boss, right up until the end, even when the words came hard. And I listened, the way she'd listened to me on the counter. Without sympathy face, just present, just there, just refusing to leave the room. And somewhere in the middle of it, I understood that this was the actual thing. Not the napkin, not the snowstorm, not the song. This. 2 people sitting in a small warm room at 2 a.m., handing each other the truth in pieces, and neither one getting up to leave. That was the whole thing. That was what I'd lost in the fire and the after. Not a house, not a marriage. Just this. Somebody in the room while you're sad. I'm scared, Joey said, near the end of the night, apropos of nothing and everything. Of this, of you. You're a trucker, Eli. Your whole life is leaving. And I'm a woman who's been left by everybody who ever had somewhere better to be. Including, eventually, my own father, which isn't fair to say because he didn't choose it, but grief isn't fair. She looked at me. So I need to know if you're a before person or an after person, because I can't do another after person. I don't have it in me. I thought about how to answer that. The easy thing was to promise her forever, but forever's cheap at 2 a.m., and we both knew it. So instead I said, I can't promise you I'll never leave because leaving's the job, and I won't lie to you on the second night. But I can promise you the difference between us and the people who left you. They left towards something better. I've spent 3 years leaving away from everything, because away was safer than staying still. You're the first thing in 3 years I've wanted to drive toward. I held her eyes. I don't know if that's enough. But it's true, and you strike me as a woman who'd rather have true than enough. Joey was quiet for a long moment. Then she got up, came around the tiny table, and sat down in my lap like it was the most natural thing in the world, and tucked her face into my neck, and said, yeah. I'd rather have true. And we stayed like that until the snow stopped. And when I finally drove away at dawn, it was the first time in 3 years that driving away felt like leaving something instead of escaping it. That's the difference nobody tells you about. Escaping and leaving feel identical from the inside, until you finally have something worth coming back to. Then you find out they were never the same thing at all. I won't pretend it was simple after that. Nothing real is. I took the hams to Kansas City the next morning when they finally opened the interstate, and the whole 6 hours I kept checking the rear view like the diner might have been a thing I dreamed, a fever I drove out of. But I'd kept the nap. It was on the dash where I could see it. Don't make me spend midnight alone in careful blue pen, and every time I doubted whether it had happened, I looked at the napkin and knew it had. The diner was closed, actually closed. It was Christmas. Even the blue spruce takes Christmas off. But there was a light on in the apartment above it, and when I knocked on the side door, Joey opened it in sweatpants and an oversized sweater with flour on one cheek, and she looked at me standing there in the snow and said, "You came back." I had a reason. The pie's downstairs and the diner's closed. I didn't come back for the pie, Joey. We established this. And she smiled. The real one, the chest one, and she stepped back and let me in. And her apartment smelled like cinnamon. And there was a tiny Christmas tree on the kitchen table with about 4 ornaments on it. And she'd been baking because, she said, I don't know how to not feed people. It's a disease. And we sat at her tiny table and ate cookies shaped like nothing in particular and talked until the snow stopped. That was the beginning. The actual beginning, the one that came after the napkin. We did it the slow way, because we had to. I was a trucker. My life was routes and delivery windows and weeks on the road. She was rooted in a town she'd stayed in out of duty, and was only now learning to choose. We were 2 people who'd both made an entire identity out of being alone, and you don't undo that with one good night and a folded napkin. You undo it slowly, on purpose, over a lot of phone calls from truck stops, and a lot of detours that cost me fuel money I pretended not to count. I started routing myself through. It's the dirty secret of long haul. You have more control over your route than dispatch wants you to know. I started taking the loads that put me through Kansas, through that nothing town just over the line, and Joey started keeping the diner open. A little later on the nights she knew I was coming, and the regulars started to notice that there was a trucker who showed up too often for a town with nothing in it. And Joey started to not care that they noticed. Earl asked me if you were my boyfriend, she told me one night in February, sliding into the booth across from me. Across now, because we'd graduated past the counter. And sitting across from someone is its own kind of intimacy, when you've spent your life avoiding being looked at. What'd you tell Earl? I told Earl that Earl still owes the register $4 from November and should mind his pies. She stole a fry off my plate. But yeah, I told him yeah, my chest did the thing. You did? Don't make it weird, Marsh. I folded a napkin under a pie for you in December. I've been all in since before you knew my last name. She ate the fry. It's Kowalski, by the way. You still don't know it. You've been calling me Joey for 2 months like I'm a golden retriever. Joey Kowalski. There it is. I learned her, the way you learn a person when you've decided to stick around. I learned she sang off key while she rolled pie crust and got embarrassed if she caught you listening. I learned she sent leftovers home with the regulars who lived alone and pretended it was because the food would go to waste. I learned the empty house she'd stayed in, for her father wasn't empty in her head. That she still set out his coffee mug some mornings out of an 11-year habit, and then put it back, and that the first time she did it in front of me she cried. And I didn't try to fix it. I just turned her coffee mug a quarter turn and let her be sad somebody in the room. And she learned me. She learned the lever's face, and she learned the difference between when I was tired and when I was running. She learned that 3 years of holidays alone had taught me to flinch from being celebrated, and she untaught it slowly, one ordinary Tuesday at a time. She learned about Dana and the fire, and the night I finally told her the whole thing, not the counter version, the real one, all of it. She didn't say she was sorry. She said, "You didn't lose your home in that fire, Eli. Your home left 18 months later when you stopped reaching for each other." The house was just the house, and it was the truest thing anybody'd ever said to me about it, and I had to go sit in my truck for 10 minutes because of how true it was. The town tested us, the way small towns do. There was a Sunday in March when one of her brothers came home, Danny, the one with the skyline career, and found a trucker eating eggs in his late father's diner across from his sister. And he did the thing big brothers do, where they get protective at exactly the wrong moment for exactly the wrong reasons. "So you just pass through," Danny said, in the tone of a man who'd decided the answer before he asked. "Convenient. A girl in every truck stop, that the deal?" I felt the old flinch start, the lever's instinct. Just go. Don't make a scene. Get back on the road where nobody can be disappointed in you. But Joey set down the coffee pot and answered before I could retreat into it. "Danny," she said, calm and level, "you flew in for 1 weekend out of the year, same as always, and you've been home for 4 hours, and you've already decided you know more about my life than I do, so let me catch you up." She crossed her arms. "I stayed. For 11 years. I stayed for Dad while you were getting your big life, and I'm not throwing that in your face because I chose it, but I get to choose this too. And this," she nodded at me, "is a man who drives 6 hours out of his way to sit in a diner with me in a town with nothing in it. You flew in once a year. He routes himself through every chance he gets. So you don't get to fly in for 1 weekend and call him the one who isn't serious." Danny didn't have anything for that. There wasn't anything to have. After a long quiet, he stuck out his hand to me and said, "Danny Kowalski." And I shook it, and that was that. Not friendship, not yet, but the end of the interrogation. On the walk to my truck after, Joey leaned into my side. "You didn't run," she said, when Danny started in. "A few months ago you'd have run. I almost did. But you didn't." She looked up at me. "That's the whole thing, Eli. You stopped running. You used to take the road so nobody could watch you be alone. Now you take the road to somebody. Same highway. Whole different direction. That was 3 Christmases ago. I don't take the Christmas Eve runs anymore. I take Christmas Eve off," which is a sentence I couldn't have said 4 years ago without something in me seizing up. "I spend it at the Blue Spruce, which Joey still keeps open late on the 24th. But not alone now, never alone. We keep it open for the other ones. The graveyard guys, the truckers stuck by closed roads, the night shift nurses coming off, the lonely regulars with nowhere else. Joey makes the pie. I pour the coffee. We've turned her reason to be alone into a reason to make sure nobody else has to be. And there's something about that I can't quite say out loud without my voice doing something. Last Christmas Eve a kid came in, 22, maybe, driving his first solo long haul, terrified, stamping snow off his boots, the lever's face already starting to set in on a face that young, which broke my heart a little. He sat at the counter and ordered something fast because he had to sleep in the cab and get back on the road the second they reopened the interstate. "They're not reopening the interstate," Joey told him, pouring his coffee without looking at the pot. "Not tonight. You're stuck, sugar." And I watched her slide a slice of pecan pie in front of him that he hadn't ordered, and I watched her not fold a napkin, because she didn't need to anymore. She had me for that, and instead she just nodded at the stool next to mine and said, "Sit down. It's almost midnight, and around here, nobody does the alone thing on Christmas Eve. House rule." The kid looked at the pie, then at the two of us, the trucker and the waitress who'd somehow built a whole life in a town with nothing in it, and he sat down. Joey came around the counter and slid onto the stool beside me, always next to, and pulled a second fork out of her apron pocket, and under the counter her hand found mine, and the radio played the song for what had to be the 1,000th time. It still didn't feel like a thing to survive. It felt like the right song. It had for 3 years now. I keep the napkin in my wallet. Don't make me spend midnight alone. The blue pens faded and the papers soft as cloth from being folded and unfolded 1,000 times. Sometimes on a long haul, I'll pull it out at a truck stop just to look at it, just to remember that the entire shape of my life turned on a woman seeing a 20 on a counter and reading the whole lonely truth of me off it, and deciding to fold a napkin instead of letting me drive away. The interstate closed that night. That's the thing I come back to. If the snow hadn't shut the road from there to Salina, I'd have eaten my patty melt and slept in the cab and rolled out at dawn and never known. The whole life I have now exists because a blizzard made me stop moving long enough for somebody to ask me to stay. Sometimes the best thing that ever happens to you is the road closing. What would you have done if you were stuck somewhere alone on Christmas Eve, and a stranger slid you a folded note that said, "Don't make me spend midnight alone"? Have you ever had one closed road, one canceled plan, one storm change the entire direction of your life? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one kept you company tonight, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next run.